Coming up on Tech News today, why Apple made peace with HTC and why Samsung is sticking it to Apple. And also, YouTube cancels the 60%. All that more coming up.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Monday, November 12th, 2012. Tech News Today is brought to you by GoToMeeting with HD Faces by Citrix, the powerfully simple way to meet and collaborate with colleagues and clients from anywhere. You can share the same screen and see each other face-to-face with HD video conferencing, even from an iPad. Sign up for your 30-day free trial today. Visit GoToMeeting.com, click on the Try It Free button, and use promo code TNT. And by the new Squarespace. Squarespace introduces a new content management system, making it faster and easier to create a high-quality website, blog, or online portfolio, plus more than 50 new features, including mobile responsive designs. For a free trial and 10% off your first purchase, go to squarespace.com and use offer code TNT11. And by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your iPhone, iPad, MacBook, or Android smartphones. Find out what your gadget is worth and get cash to upgrade to the latest iPhone at Gazelle.com. Welcome to Tech News Today. I'm Tom Merritt.
I'm Sarah Lane, giving 110%.
I'm Iyaz, 32%.
And I'm Jason Howell.
And this is the show where we keep you up to date on the most important stories in the tech world and put them into context for you, starting with the top 10 stories of the day in the news feeds. Finish it. Apple and HTC surprised folks this weekend by finishing their patent battle, declaring patent peace between the two companies. They've been fighting a patent battle since 2010, now have agreed on a 10-year cross-licensing deal. The terms were confidential, but analyst Xia Wu reports his sources say HTC will probably be paying between $8 to $10 per Android handset.
RIM President and CEO Thorsten Heinz has announced in a press release that the BlackBerry 10 launch event is happening on January 30th, 2013. The event will happen simultaneously in multiple countries around the world and come with very juicy, fun, interesting BlackBerry 10 phone details, we hope.
Juicy Blackberries, get it? It's funny. Digitime says that Apple is already working on the next iPhone, the iPhone 5S. The site says Apple ought to have a trial production started in December with production at full steam ahead starting up in Q1 of 2013. The reason? The yield rates for iPhone 5 is low, so Apple's accelerated the certification process for the next phone instead.
That's Digitime's reporting that.
Right.
Just re-emphasizing that. Steve Ballmer told French newspaper La Parisienne that sales of Microsoft Surface are, quote, starting modestly. Steve Ballmer's usually a little more over the top than that, so everybody paid attention. He blames the modest sales on restricted availability. You can only buy the Surface online and at Microsoft stores. Ballmer took the opportunity to extol the virtues of the Surface Pro, which will run Windows 8 and should be out after the first of the year.
Samsung has raised the price of the mobile processors the company supplies to Apple by 20%. Korea's Shozon Ilbo reported Monday, citing a person familiar with negotiations. According to the report, Apple buys all APs used for production of iPhones and iPads from Samsung, with the volume estimated to be 130 million units last year and more than 200 million units this year, with a contract running through 2014.
Tomorrow, Call of Duty Black Ops 2 launches, and USA Today reports that the game will have an impact on productivity. USA Today interviewed some bosses and found that they expect a number of employees to take the day off and others to have unplanned absences. Call of Duty Black Ops 2 hits stores at midnight.
YouTube's getting ready to decide which of its partner channels it will renew and which it will set free. All Things D reports YouTube estimates it will fund around 40% of the 160 channels. Let me correct that. It will not fund around 40% of the 160 channels it launched last year. Channels that don't receive a second round of funding may continue on YouTube, and they get to keep more of their ad revenue. They just have to pay for the whole thing themselves.
After the government in Gabon shut down Kim.com's mega domain idea with the domain .ga, Mega, the holding site, is now live at New Zealand-based domain mega.co.nz. A statement by .com on Twitter read, "New Zealand will be the home of our new website, mega.co.nz, powered by legality and protected by the law. At this point, the site only offers an email sign-up to keep users up to date on news of the launch, plus links and information for hosting partners and developers seeking APIs and financial investors.
The USA is king of the supercomputers, and it's in part thanks to NVIDIA. In fact, NVIDIA and AMD both announced new high-performance graphics chips for supercomputers today. There's a big conference going on in Salt Lake City. NVIDIA unveiled the Kepler-2 K20 and K20X cards. It's the K20X that powers the new supercomputer Titan, a 20 petaflop supercomputer at the U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and now the fastest supercomputer. AMD announced the FirePro SM10000 GPU, which targets high-performance computers and servers in virtualized environments.
Here we go. Hardware news from Valve. Gabe Newell told 4chan that the company is already beta testing its hardware. Newell said that there are 3 different controller prototypes being tried out. Pictures of the device have yet to leak, but this is the internet, so expect pictures eventually.
This episode of Tech News Today brought to you by Citrix and GoToMeeting with HD Faces. When you're meeting in person, you express a lot that doesn't come out of your mouth. It comes out of your eyes. It comes out of your facial expressions. It comes out of your hand movements. And if you're just on a phone call, you can't see that stuff. You want to communicate more effectively, get things done with people who are all over the map. In different locations, we recommend GoToMeeting with HD Faces. You can meet face-to-face with colleagues and clients no matter where they are, and it's just a click. You send them a link, they click the link, you start the conference. You can even use it on your iPad. We use it all the time here to meet with clients that can't make it all the way up to Petaluma to the TWiT studio, but you don't have to take our word for it. Try GoToMeeting free for 30 days. Do it now. Don't wait for the special offer. Visit gotomeeting.com. That's GOTOMEETING.com. Click the Try It Free button and use this promo code TNT. Remember, use the promo code TNT to get that free 30-day trial. And we thank GoToMeeting and Citrix for their support of Tech News Today. Joining us now to put some context around the stories in the world of technology, Declan McCullagh, Chief Political Correspondent at CNET.com. Good to have you back on the show, Declan. How's it going?
Hey, can't complain. All is well here at CNET. How are things with you folks?
We are doing well. Off to a roaring Monday start with a little bit of patent peace. HTC and Apple settling their differences, and lots of theories as to why this is. Here's the basics in case you missed it in the news fuse. 10-year deal. HTC had lost its case at the International Trade Commission in late 2011. They did a workaround to get around that, but HTC's complaint against Apple at the ITC failed. August 29th, chairwoman of HTC, Cher Wang, had said, we're really not going to settle. It looked like they were going to keep pressing. HTC already pays Microsoft $5 per Android handset, and so it was a surprise this weekend when Apple, which had threatened to go thermonuclear against Android handset makers, settled. HTC, which had said they weren't going to settle and had picked up a lot of patents from Google, had picked up patents when they bought S3 Graphics, they settled. And Xia Wu says it's probably $6 to $8. I think I said 8 to 10 in the news fuse. That was a mistake. $6 to $8 per handset. That HTC will pay Apple. At least that's what Xia Wu's sources tell him. The actual agreement is confidential. Declan, when you look at this, there's lots of reasons why you wouldn't want to continue this patent battle. It's costly. Maybe HTC is shifting their focus to Windows Phone. What do you think brought this about?
Well, I should preface this by saying I don't cover patents full time. I've tried my best to stay away from it. It's a morass. You could spend your entire lifetime and then some covering patent stuff. My colleague at CNET, Josh Lowenson, covered the Apple v. Samsung case in San Jose. Though, against my better judgment, I've been drawn into some patent coverage, including last Friday. There was a so-called patent troll. Had a preliminary victory against Apple that I wrote about. But the way I think of this here is that, I mean, a patent litigation, these kinds of multi-million-dollar lawsuits that enrich really only the outside law firms companies use. I mean, it's a lottery, and you might win the lottery, or your competitor might win the lottery. And the problem is that if you lose, then you have to pay out their lottery winnings. And so sometimes it's better to have this certainty of it's a stiff payment. I mean, $10 a handset, if that's what it is, can add up. But it's better than having this uncertainty of $1 billion Samsung-esque lottery payment when a jury just doesn't understand technology at all. And so you end up with what can happen. Let's have certainty instead of uncertainty is the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, HTC's Android phones aren't exactly like a chart topper by any means. And if they can settle up with Apple and they could have features that no other Android phone could have at this point, because HTC actually has licensing rights to certain things that Apple lets you do, like slide to unlock. As silly as that is still Apple's. If HTC has some of the same functionalities and ease of use built into their own phones, that might be more advantageous to them than figuring out, okay, look, fight Apple indefinitely, try to keep coming up with workarounds, and then maybe get our stuff blocked from import all the time.
But why would Apple settle, Sarah? I mean, those are good reasons why HTC would settle. They had a horrible quarter, a 79% downturn year over year. But there's no advantage in Apple helping HTC out, is there?
Well, there is if they get $8 to $10 or even something as low as $6 on each handset sold. I mean, if Apple believes in any way that HTC still has a future as a dominant play, well, maybe not dominant player for a while, but as a player in the Android market, Apple wins. Sure. I mean, Apple. The thing is that the Apple versus HTC, it's obviously very unfair. Apple has a lot more money. They can stay in court forever, but it's not really advantageous for Apple either. It's a waste of time. It could drag out for years. The whole thing with Apple and Samsung is different also than Apple and HTC. Some say, well, Samsung in many ways really was confusing to the customer. People didn't really know the difference. HTC, not so much. I mean, Apple might have known, this might not even really turn out the way that we want it to. Why not just get some dollars for every handset, go into a multi-year licensing agreement, and everybody wins? And it sort of is a slap in the face to Google because Apple's like, hey, look, we can play nice with certain Android handset makers.
When they're about to go out of business and we need them to stay around to keep competition pressure on Samsung.
Yeah.
That is kind of a really good point. Apple doesn't want there to be one opponent. They want many opponents because it's easier to fight them off. Of course, HTC did settle with Microsoft, and now HTC has become a premier partner for the Windows Phone. I want to go around the horn and just get everybody's opinion. Do we think this indicates a slowing down of the smartphone patent battles, or is this just mean that HTC is going to be the first victim of many in this? Declan, what do you think?
It's going to take a lot to slow this thing down. I mean, we've already basically gone thermonuclear in terms of Silicon Valley's patent wars. The loss that I wrote about last Friday was a holding company set up by Sony and Nokia, and they created this. It's not quite a front company; it's a patent holding company, and they went ahead and sued Apple over GPS patents and answering phones, putting the call on hold while you're in another call patents. And so these lawsuits were already in progress, and so it's going to take a lot to settle them all. But I'm hopeful. I hope that this is reducing the tensions, because it's the only folks who really are winning out of this are the lawyers. It's not the engineers, it's not the executives who keep getting distracted by having to fight off patent lawsuits and go to depositions. I hope this is a reducing of tensions.
Apple settled with Nokia. Microsoft settled with Barnes & Noble. Now we have another one. As a retired lawyer, Iyaz, do you feel like you're missing out on the end of the patent?
There's a good reason why I didn't go into IP law. I'd probably have a heart attack. That's why I don't do that stuff, and that's why I studied it for a little bit in school. I do think that this is going to slow down the whole wars when it comes to smartphones in general, except when it comes to Samsung and Apple. I think those two are going to keep bickering to the very bitter end, even with a $1 billion damage settlement. But the thing is, if Apple can say to other people, hey, look, HTC and us, we worked it out. This is the way it worked. Same thing with Microsoft. They did the same thing with a lot of different companies with their Android patents and said, look, we kind of got you this way. This first company fell. You should be the second. You should be the third, to the point where Microsoft doesn't litigate when it comes to the Android patents, to the point where they just have a huge bunch of money coming in because everyone's like, okay, we're not going to fight you because those other companies didn't fight you. So if it starts off this way, I think it's going to slow down.
Sarah, peace or obliteration? Or some other
Between
choice.
Apple and HTC?
Yeah, well, just in the patent wars in general. Is this just a one-off for Apple, or are we going to see these things start to get settled?
I sure would like them to start to get settled. I'm with you. As far as Apple and Samsung, they're so intertwined still, which is kind of leading us into our next story, but Apple and Samsung is a little bit of a unique relationship, especially because Samsung is such a huge competitor. I mean, that is Apple's big competitor right now, at least in the mobile space. So I would like this to be the beginning of a wide scale peace agreement, but I'm not real optimistic.
Well, and it's a really good point. The Apple-Samsung battle is shaping up to be the bigger battle than the patent battle. Patent's just one front in that battle. We've talked before how Samsung, they're in many different businesses. They do white goods and they do appliances and they do which are the same thing. They make chips for Apple, and we've said, look, it's easy to personalize these situations and say, oh, well, they hate each other, but they're big businesses, and certain arms of businesses often will do things that aren't in the best interest of the other arm. Sony's a great example of that, where they're making DVD rippers while their Sony movie arm is fighting against DVD rippers. But there's a story out today that looks like maybe Samsung is fighting back against Apple with its chip making. Yeah, so the A6 mobile processors that are custom designed by Apple, we've talked about this in the past, are built by Samsung. They used to have more of a deeper relationship, but Samsung is still putting them together. And part of that reason is because Samsung just is sort of top dog in production value. Apple has experimented and is trying more and more to get things like RAM and flash storage from other companies, but still needs Samsung in order to keep up with demand. Korea's Shozun.com had a story out, of course citing anonymous sources, that said Samsung is increasing the price of these application processors by about 20%, up to anyway, and that it's apparently the first time Samsung has decided to raise the prices on processors, the ones that Apple's buying, and that Apple's hands are tied, rather. Arms and two. That would my arms been
Their ARM processors are tied up. That's the thing.
Twin Peaks reference number 1. Everybody drink. And Apple really has no choice. Has to keep up with demand. I mentioned in the news fuse that Apple and Samsung apparently have a contract that extends through 2014. Yeah, I don't know how much that really plays into it. Contracts can always be redrawn. But I think the question is, the Verge article, one of the articles that wrote up about this said, maybe part of this is the fact that Samsung just invested a significant amount of money, $4 billion or so, into a plant in Austin, Texas, which is the same plant that builds Apple's processors. Do they just want some more money? I mean, is this really personal? Is it really Samsung saying, okay, the writing's on the wall. We know eventually Apple does not want to work with us. So while they have to, until they have a plan B, they'll just pay us more. They can afford it. What do you guys think?
I mean, I could see this being, okay, there's $1 billion settlement. They're like, okay, well, you know what? We need to make money somehow. Why don't you pay us 20% more and we'll give it back to you in damages eventually? But I could also see this being simply supply and demand. The Galaxy S3 is selling like crazy. They have to make their own processors for their own machines. They're also making Chromebooks. They're making all kinds of things that are using ARM processors. And the fact is, if Samsung could get it at the best price, even with a 20% increase, that's what Apple's going to do. They're not going to bother to increase the price just out of spite, because they want to make sure that those devices, Apple hardware, continues to make them as much money as possible.
Yeah, I think that's quite possible that it's just market forces. I think it's also quite possible that Samsung does see the writing on the wall, as you mentioned, Sarah, that Apple's starting to lower their orders and reduce what they order from us. So, we're going to have to make it up somehow. And why not raise the price while we still got them if they're going to leave anyway? Declan, does that make any sense to you?
Possibly. I mean, but let me get back to one other thing that I wanted to return to, and that is regarding the broader patent wars. We have a specialized patent court in Washington, D.C. that hears patent appeals. And, guess what? If you're a specialized patent court, if you're you think the patents are really important, just like if you were a specialized agriculture court, you think that, farmers might be really important. And so what happens is that you have this specialized court take a series of rulings, make a series of rulings over the decades that expand intellectual property holders' rights. I mean, there were no software patents until just 20 years ago. I mean, within recent memory, and in the 1980s, computer software actually existed and flourished, and people bought it. So you see the interesting thing is the Supreme Court is starting to put the smackdown on some of these really overbroad patent abuses. And so I think that what might happen if this war continues, this thermonuclear patent war, is that the Supreme Court's going to say, the software patents, they weren't intended to go that far. Congress never intended them to go that far, and it just sort of happened, and nobody expected it, and this is the result, and it's a mess. So guess what? This stops now. That's my prediction.
All right. Let's move on to YouTube, pulling the plug on at least 60% of its programming deals. YouTube will give a second round of funding. I corrected myself, and I corrected myself wrong in the news fuse today. They are only funding 30 to 40% of their original partners, and that means they're cutting at least 60% of the partners. How bad is this, Iyaz?
Well, depending on the headlines, you see that they're funding new things, or they're killing 60%, at least 60% of the channels. And those channel makers, by the way, if you are a YouTube channel maker, you're not going to find out until the next few weeks whether you're getting additional funding. So that's kind of scary. Channels don't get new deals that don't get new deals will still be on YouTube. So they're not being like canceled or kicked off in the traditional sense. It just means that YouTube won't be giving them money. And I believe the way the advertising thing works, the companies they won't be able to make any money until they pay back their initial investment from YouTube. So there's not going to be a ton of windfall that way. The director of content strategy at YouTube, he says that the site is most concerned about engagement, primarily the total watch time. So a channel that's generated and cost, how efficient programmers have been with their programming budget. So it's not just about pure views. It's about the amount of time they have and the engagement they have. That determines whether these YouTube channels will continue. This kind of sounds like traditional television, where we give you a season, and if you don't do too well, we're gonna cut off funding. Is this the strategy that YouTube should be trying, or should they be giving a more of a reinvestment / guidance kind of approach, as opposed to the traditional television approach?
Well, I mean, I think if you've got a successful YouTube channel, well, you've got two of them, right? They both have a million views a week, something like that. And production company number one that's working with YouTube has some sort of a crazy overhead because they've got these beautiful sets, and they're maybe they're paying actors, or they've got quite a bit of budget. And then company number two has a lot less than that. Obviously, YouTube's like, well, I mean, company number two just makes more sense for us because it is a traditional model, but it's also a model that we have at TWiT as well. I mean, there's only so much money that you should put into a production unless you're getting enough back for it to make sense. And I don't think that changes just because you've got YouTube now and it's easy to get your stuff out there.
Declan, what do you think? Do you think because this is a new ecosystem that maybe YouTube should be thinking differently? Or is it just, look, it's content. We got to keep doing what works?
I think YouTube is thinking differently, and it just happens that the result of the thinking so far mirrors some of the more traditional approaches. And the broader way to think about it is that Google is an incredibly data-driven company, much more so than any other tech company I can think of. And this was because of the founders. I mean, you have founders who are computer science PhDs, and they're going to create a company that's going to be very responsive to what actually happens as opposed to what you want to happen. And so they tend to be ruthless in cutting products that don't live up to their expectations, and it's just entirely data driven. If you look at the numbers don't make sense. It's kind of a dispassionate. I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of that if my show got canceled, but in the long run, it probably is a good thing for the company.
Full disclosure, in a week's time, my wife becomes an employee of YouTube. That gives me no insight into this particular story. But what does is the fact that I do a show, Sword and Laser, on the Geek and Sundry channel, and the Geek and Sundry channel is funded by YouTube. Now, this doesn't affect me directly because I get my funding from for our little corner of Geek and Sundry directly from them. But I know that what YouTube's plan is here is to get all of the channels off the YouTube funding. So this is different than television from the beginning. They're basically saying we want to fund these channels so that people start to see how they can use YouTube to make successful television. We're just basically trying to jumpstart things so that production companies can come in on their own and use YouTube as a platform. YouTube doesn't want to be in the business of being a production company. So when they cut 60%, some of it is saying, look, these aren't worth funding anymore. We're just not seeing the integration. We're not seeing the uptake that makes it worth the experiment anymore. But they may continue on their own. Maybe they'll get more efficient and maybe it'll be better and they'll be more successful without our money. So it's not against their original premise to cut funding for a channel. Some of those channels, they may say, you know what, they don't need our money anymore. And the channels that they are continuing to fund are channels that they say, this is worth the experiment. You know, we're making enough money. They're efficient with their budgets. It's worth giving them another year to prove themselves. But I know that the ultimate goal here, or at least from what I understand anyway, the ultimate goal here is for YouTube not to fund any channels, but channels to fund themselves.
Well, then should they be cutting the funding from the top companies then? Because they don't necessarily need YouTube anymore instead of cutting the bottom 60%?
No, I mean, you want to, I mean, it's still early enough in the experiment that you want successful channels, right? So if it would be even more ridiculous, in my opinion, to cut the successful channels, because then you're just funding things that aren't working as well. I think what YouTube is looking at is saying, hey, you know what, we're going to fund these things, we're going to get these things going, but we're going to be smart with our money. Let's take a quick break and thank our other sponsor for today's show, Squarespace. The new Squarespace.com, now faster and easier than ever to create a high-quality website or blog, online portfolio. If you're a photographer, the new Squarespace 6 is beautiful for showing off galleries. And if you do any kind of content and you haven't tried Squarespace in a while, go try out Squarespace 6. Along with the 24/7 customer support that Squarespace gives, along with the staff that is so dedicated that they'll carry buckets of fuel up 17 floors after a hurricane to keep their site online. The new Squarespace is also entirely easier to use with a different code base that uses HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and JSON for speed and flexibility, or JSON as some people say. The new Squarespace gives you and your website users the best mobile experience too. It resizes photos across different platforms and it detects, oh, you're on a phone, we're going to give you the smaller version so it fits. You're on a tablet, we're going to resize that template, make it so it makes sense whatever device people are using to see your website. But you don't have to take our word for us. Go try out Squarespace.com. You don't even have to give them a credit card or anything. No codes, no nothing. Just try it out. Squarespace.com. Put together a site. If you do decide to keep the service and you want to purchase it, use offer code TNT11 and get 10% off your first purchase on new Squarespace account. That includes monthly and annual plans. And don't forget, with an annual plan, you get a free domain name registration. That's Squarespace.com. Use the offer code TNT11. And we thank them for their support of Tech News Today. Got a few more stories to discuss. Steve Ballmer, as we mentioned, talking to Le Parisien in France, says that Surface sales are starting modestly because of the limited availability, although it's very un-Ballmer-like to say anything modest, to say anything in a reserved tone. So a lot of people are jumping on this saying if Ballmer's calling it modestly,
they must be bad.
They must be in the tank. Yeah. Asked about supply shortages, which is the other side of this. It's been out of stock online from time to time. Some people have been going into Microsoft stores and finding they're not available for sale. Ballmer said it's a good sign and that they'll fix this problem quickly. So they're not selling enough of them because they don't have enough of them, apparently. And then he went and started talking about the Windows 8 Pro Surface, which will come out after the first of the year, saying it was unique and equipped with a new Intel processor with a higher screen resolution, and that he really thinks that, you know, that's the way to go. Well, he didn't say that, but he really seemed to point towards Windows 8 Surface as the way to go. I have to say, I've been using the Microsoft Surface RT. I like it, but I really do think I'm going to trade it in for a Windows 8 Pro Surface because the things that I don't like about it won't be a problem when I'm running Windows 8. They're all RT restrictions.
I mean, the Surface is Microsoft's their real first venture into hardware. For it to be like selling like gangbusters, or the fact that it's got that new interface. There's a whole bunch of things going against it from the start. It's RT, so you don't know, you're not going to get the full desktop. You're not going to get the full apps that you used to have. It's Microsoft's first piece of hardware. There's all this. It's only available online at Microsoft stores. A ton of reasons why it shouldn't be selling huge, I'd imagine. But I mean, it's their first product, so I'm just expecting. For it to be anything less than modest, I would be surprised by, I guess. If it was like, this sold, millions of people bought it, billions of people bought it, that would be insane because this is a very untested...
if billions of people bought anything, that would be insane.
That's what I'm saying. That it's an untested product, completely.
Well, we bought a Surface for our home over the weekend. There was a kiosk.
Thrilled.
No, well, everyone's like calling me a Microsoft hater. So now I get really uncomfortable whenever I talk about it because I'm worried that I'm going to say something, and you guys will all jump on me.
She had a smirk on her face when she said Surface.
Oh yeah, she said Windows Mobile, but there's a kiosk at one of the stores in downtown San Francisco is full of Surface tablets. So I'm not really sure where the supply shortages are. I mean, online is one thing, and that would be certainly annoying. But there were heaps and piles of them, at least locally for me. So.
Yeah, anecdotally, I went into Corte Madera, California stores this week. There's a Microsoft store right near an Apple store. Both of them were filled with people. I couldn't tell if more people were carrying out iPads than carrying out Surfaces, but people were interested in both of the places. Declan, you've covered technology long enough to be able to read between the lines, read the tea leaves. What's your interpretation of Ballmer calling this modest sales?
I wouldn't read too much into it. I mean, it's much better to surprise on the upside than the downside. If you lower everyone's expectations and then you actually do well, then your stock is going to go up and everyone's going to be happy. But I mean, this last year, Ballmer called the shipments of Windows Phone going from a very small to very small. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that there was going to be something like 3 to 5 million Surface units sold this quarter. I mean, for a lot of other companies, 3 to 5 million would be a wonderful success. I mean, if I could start a business and have 3 to 5 million people actually paying hundreds of dollars for my product, I'd be happy. The problem is with Microsoft, there's such an expectation of instant success, and it might take a while. I mean, there's not everything is going to succeed instantly, especially when you're creating a different product and almost a different ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Ballmer did say very small to very small, because we may be seeing Steve Ballmer just getting better at being CEO and managing stock expectations. And that's the way I read this too, is him saying, look, when our next quarterly report comes out, you're not going to see gargantuan figures for the Microsoft Surface. So get ready for that. But it is selling well. And when the Windows 8 Pro Surface comes out after the first of the year, we think it's going to sell like hotcakes. Steve Ballmer is not always going to be the one saying everything is going to be awesome anymore. If he wants to keep his job, and it's something that he's under fire with.
And if you look at Microsoft's stock price for the last decade, it has not been awesome. This is not the 1990s all over again. It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah. Let's get over to that Digitimes report that we mentioned earlier about iPhone 5S. Would they do that to people coming out with a new iPhone just 6 months after the old one, just like they did with the new iPad?
Let's hit that rumor mill, shall we? Because this is what happens when there are stories out. So yeah, Digitimes, like you were saying, you can see how excited I am about this. The Apple's working on the next iPhone due to lack of yield when it comes to the iPhone 5. The new iPad would be coming in the second quarter of 2013. Would they mess with people like that again? I mean, it's possible. The thing is, would Apple bump up their production schedule such that effectively they're releasing products every 6 months instead of the yearly cycle that we've been used to? Because a lot of other manufacturers do that. There's not like this big, long wait. Oh, finally September something comes out. It's like, no, 6 months, maybe even with the press release, this is what we're giving you. What do you think, Tom? Do you think they're going to move to the 6 month model?
I actually think we're overthinking it, saying like, oh, well, they were on the yearly model, and so now that they've moved, well, that's going to be a yearly model. Maybe Apple's just getting off the cycle and saying, you know what, we're going to start putting out products when we're ready to put out products. And the new iPhone could be coming at any time. You just never know. That's the way it's been with their other products. That's the way it's been with laptops. You don't get new MacBook Pros at exactly the same time. In fact, there's whole websites devoted to kind of gauging the average time between product releases and guessing when the next one's coming.
Well, and Apple's already surprised us at the mini launch. We also got a refresh of what's now the 4th gen iPad Retina display, and everyone went, why are they doing that? And it's like, I think you're right. I think Apple's like, it's ready. I mean, we might as well start selling them, and when something better is ready, then we'll roll out without too. I actually think it's kind of makes more sense.
Declan, do you think they're trying to fight off the Osborne effect, where it comes to, okay, it's August, nobody's buying an iPhone, nobody's going to do anything, it's going to be a weird quarter coming up, by staggering or like making these surprise releases? Is that going to help Apple, or is this something that sounds like a Digitimes rumor?
Oh, I love that phrase, fighting off the Osborne effect. The way I read this, and I've been an Apple user since the 1980s, the Apple IIe days, and so I followed the company on and off. And it's that they're, for the first few years of the iPhone, this was a company with a product that nobody else was competing effectively with, and so they could set their own release schedule. And now there's so many very good, even excellent Android devices, and Nexus 4 just came out. There's that now Apple has to be much more competitive, and that probably means more frequent updates, because every week there's or every month there's some interesting new Android phone. It wouldn't be a surprise if there's an iPhone on something like a year to a year and a half schedule, as opposed and maybe every half year we get a refresh.
Yeah, I agree with you, Declan. I think this is just a shift in the Apple cycle. All right, let's finish off with some analysis of the Korean tech scene that was really interesting at the Diplomat.com.
Yeah, North Korean at that. I am obsessed with North Korea. It's just a fascinating place to me because there's so little that we know about so much of the company.
For me, it's because I grew up with the Soviet Union looming so large and the secrecy around it. North Korea is kind of almost nostalgia in that it's one of the few places that's that same exact trope.
And so many millions of people in the country do not have access to some of the basic internet tools that we think, should be a right as citizens of the world. So this is this was authored by Scott Thomas Bruce. He's the project manager for the Partnership for Nuclear Security at CRDF Global, also an associate at the Nautilus Institute and the East West Center. He wrote up in the Diplomat.com a really fascinating account of cell phones becoming available to some North Korean citizens and why. The story is that the government is allowing up to 1 million cell phones in the country for the first time, but only available to about 5% of the population. They've got sort of a caste system. So these are people who have been determined to have good social standing and to be very with the North Korean government. And what they're using is a cell phone system made by KoryoLink. So members can call other members on the KoryoLink network. No international calls, though. It's state-sponsored intranet in North Korea, which is called Kwangmyong, which is also restricted to people in North Korea with social standing. So you've got about 5% of the population who has these sort of the cell phones. They can call each other. They have access to the intranet, which is stuff like message boards, chat, state-sponsored media. University students are encouraged to use this intranet, technical experts, scientists as well. But then they've also got daily sponsored text coming in on the phones. Internet activity on discussion boards is closely monitored by the state security department. The network can be shut down by the state at any time. So it's not as if all of a sudden you've got 1 million people in North Korea who've got smartphones and now they can kind of go nuts. It's a very, very different experiment at all. The state will have to choose which calls to monitor, though. I mean, with 1 million phones, they can't possibly monitor all of them. So you figure probably some focus on foreigners, senior government, military officials. But it really does change the dynamic of the country if someone in a large city can call someone in a remote area of the country. That just wasn't possible before. IT is supposedly being rolled out because North Korea is interested in acquiring scientific information also from abroad to support development in North Korea. Obviously, state screened, of course. Plus, the North Korean government is interested in investment from other countries, particularly from China. Apparently, limited use of cell phones was a huge challenge and has been for investors dealing with North Korea. If you're going to be involved in infrastructure and building out, well, it's really hard to get anything done. You certainly can't bring in your own cell phones. You can't even talk to people in different... It's like, how does that all work? But at the same time, making sure that the public, even though only a very small part of the public even has access to these tools, still does not actually have access to any sort of internet of any kind. It does change the dynamic of the country. It's sort of giving a little bit, opening the door a little bit, but still holding people back.
Well, if it's only to the top 5% of this elite class, I mean, isn't that something that's somewhat they would benefit the most from? Not, I mean, they wouldn't be sharing, and they're probably not going to be giving phones to lower castes or anything. So,
no.
I mean, it doesn't seem like this would be a thing that it's not a start of a trend by any means. Because if you're just benefiting the top class, isn't that the class that just wants the power anyway?
Well, I mean, if 1 million phones are available to people where before there were zero, I don't feel like that's just a few people who now get to talk to each other on the phone. I mean, this has a little bit more to do with, we have an infrastructure that foreign money could be interested in. Look what we're starting to do. We're starting to open it up. You can move about the country and make phone calls and communicate with folks if you are at least in this elite member status, whereas you couldn't before. And
China, which is incredibly sophisticated at this sort of management, has problems keeping things under control. And granted, it's a much larger country. I'm curious whether North Korea can control the effects of allowing even a thin wedge of that sort of freedom in. And Declan, I'm curious what you think of that.
Well, I agree that giving phones or allowing the wealthy to buy phones, this is not exactly the folks who are going to overthrow the nation state, which has to be what these leaders are worried about. But three thoughts. I was in Burma, and I reported on what was happening there when I was at Time a while back. And you run. They had the same situation. It's basically lockdown, except if you're in one of these elite classes. And look what happened to them. I mean, it's been over a decade since I was there, and the economy has stagnated. And so this leads us to it's kind of a dictator's dilemma, right? I mean, how do you actually allow your economy to move forward and be competitive? Well, I mean, free markets, capitalism, technology. I mean, these are some of the ways you can do it. But also, if you have technology, then you might have people plotting against you on Facebook, and that cannot happen. So how much do you allow? I mean, Singapore is one model to follow. I'm not saying it's the best model, but it's allow technology, but only and allow the internet, but try to make certain types of discussions off limits through social pressure and otherwise. And one last point, you might have 1 million cell phones, but it doesn't take that much computing power to do speech recognition on the conversations and flag words. I mean, if the NSA could do this back in the 1990s in the U.S., well, there are plenty of U.S. companies and European companies that will be happy to sell that same speech recognition or SMS text recognition technology to the North Koreans for a price.
Yeah, the question is if they can run it effectively. But you're right, the technology absolutely exists. Before we get to the randomizer, real quickly, there's a story that's been breaking since just before we started the show. I've been waiting to get a little more confirmation of it. But CNET now following up on a Gizmodo report that John McAfee, who started the McAfee antivirus software company, has been accused of murder in Belize. And according to the report, McAfee is wanted by Belize's gang suppression unit in the murder of an American expat named Gregory Paul. He's a popular builder who was shot Saturday night. Gizmodo says that there was some beef between the two, also reporting that McAfee's relationships with other expats in Belize had been deteriorating. We don't know much more about that, but it is confirmed that the Belize police are looking for John McAfee. Sort of a crime story more than a tech story, but because we all know McAfee, we all know that name. We all try to keep it from running trial versions sometimes on our software. It's definitely something of note. Let's move on to the randomizer.
Randomizer.
This is a much more positive story. Stanford developing self-healing plastic to keep prosthetics and touchscreens in one piece. So the human interest part of this is that, if you have a prosthetic limb, as it is used, sometimes it deforms. This plastic would keep the form of the limb, but it will also be useful for repairing scratches and dents and dings on your gadgets. So you wouldn't have that whole scratch gate on the new iPhone. Maybe you wouldn't even need cases anymore.
Well, it says here that it doesn't work on capacitive touchscreens. So
not on the screen, but on the case.
Everywhere else would be fine. Like that. I mean, that's a lot of complaints.
And it does have nickel, so it can actually carry a current.
So I guess it can be used as an antenna or something around the device, maybe.
It could be everything but the screen.
That would be. I mean, although, do you think anybody would want to put this in their phones? The same they have the self-healing phone, putting the case manufacturers out of business. Tom, you're going to kill the economy. The economy's going to die unless the cases are self-healing.
We need subsidies for case makers. No, the material can heal within minutes of cuts through fast-forming hydrogen bonds, according to the story on Engadget.com. But who wouldn't want a gadget of any kind, tablet, laptop, that when it's scratched, it just like slowly heals?
That's Terminator. That's Terminator 2 right there. It's happening.
Declan, are you afraid of these self-healing cases that might come?
Not at all. This technology advances. Let's embrace it.
Yeah, it is a few years off from commercial use, so we have time to teach it to use its powers for good. Let's take a quick break and thank our final sponsor for today's show, Gazelle.com. You need a little fast cash. You want the simplest way to turn your old devices into cash. I mean, if you maybe that new self-healing case comes out faster than you thought, you want to get it. Get your old iPhone out of your house by selling it on Gazelle. It's simple. Go to Gazelle.com, Gazelle.com. Tell Gazelle the condition. They'll even buy broken iPhones in some cases. Get a risk-free offer for your gadget. Gazelle locks in the quote for 30 days. And once you get your new iPhone, you can then ship your old one to Gazelle. They'll even pay for the shipping, and you'll get paid fast by check or PayPal. Go to Gazelle.com right now. Get an offer on your iPhone. Do it today because your phone's not going to gain value most likely over time. It's probably going to lose value every day that you wait. So lock in that quote now. Keep it for 30 days until you figure out whether you want to sell your phone or send it off right away. They'll pay for the shipping, as I mentioned, and you'll get paid within a few days of the item being received. It's risk-free, so try it out. Gazelle.com. Sell your used iPhone today and show your support for Tech News Today. We thank them for their support of Tech News Today. What's on the calendar, Sarah?
God, yes, Tom. A lot of stuff going on this week. Microsoft's SharePoint conference started today. It runs through the 15th in Las Vegas. Focus, of course, on SharePoint and social collaboration in the enterprise. IE 10 for Windows 7 preview is coming tomorrow. It's according to the company. No word on a final release as of yet. Also, tomorrow, Call of Duty Black Ops 2 is arriving.
Oh, yes.
The next... Are you excited?
I'm actually not. It's not my game, but I know pretty much everybody else in the world is.
Well, it's not mine either, but I know it's Iyaz's favorite game ever.
Actually, I've wasted a lot of time on that.
So there you go. So you are excited. The LG Nexus 4 is hitting O2 over in the UK also tomorrow. The Nexus 10, yeah, it's hit with a bang. Smack. Good thing it's self-healing plastic. No, not yet. Nexus 10 is available starting tomorrow at $399. Nintendo has announced plans to host a Wii U launch event at its official Nintendo World Store at Rockefeller Plaza, 6 p.m. Eastern on November 17th. And Verizon has confirmed the Droid DNA on its Droid Does portal and is promising kind of an interesting unboxing on Verizon's Google Plus page on November 19th.
All right, let's see what's incoming.
Incoming message.
Got a voicemail to 260-TNT show about the Google Wallet from good old Chesterfield, Missouri.
Guys, you had some discussions last week about Google Wallet and the new Google credit card. One thing I didn't hear discussed was the reward programs that a lot of credit cards have in place. And I think Google could really get a good boost in the usage of their card if they allowed you to program the card to say, hey, if the transaction is from maybe a restaurant, it's going to go to card A, everything else is going to go to card B, or maybe it's enough in cash over this month, I'm going to switch over to this other card so I can maximize all my rewards for my various credit cards. So it would seem to be something right up the alley, and maybe they've got it in there. So that's my thoughts. Thanks. Bye.
I think that is a fantastic idea. It certainly could be done, and it would wipe out rewards programs because they all exist on breakage. They all exist on the fact that people don't actually use them efficiently or cash in the rewards, right?
There are other tools like Mint that suggest things that, like, oh, yeah, maybe you should move to this other card. Doesn't necessarily mean that people do it. If Google was doing it automatically, that's killer. But if you have to program it, I think they still have a chance.
All right, let's move on to the email.
We got an email. Gang, I'm an old-timer. During the Vietnam War, I was in the military involved in things that necessitated that I have top-secret crypto clearance. It was drummed into us over and over again that the intelligence-gathering capabilities that we were privy to were in most cases more valuable than the actual information gathered. To say it another way, the source is to be protected at all costs. Flash to the present. The methodology and techniques used by the SEALs, if compromised, could jeopardize many missions downstream from the leak. So did the SEAL team know that they should have kept their mouths shut? Based on my experience, unequivocally, yes. Are the reprimands docked pay justified? Absolutely. Thanks for that email.
Yeah, and he wanted to keep his name secret, by the way, appropriately enough.
Thank you, sir.
The thing is, though, and Declan, were you following this story last week about the SEALs getting reprimanded for consulting with EA?
Yeah, I followed it peripherally. I mean, it seems like this is an example of the Obama administration. And I'm not saying it would be any different from the Bush administration. Really like leaks that support it politically, but leaks that don't, well, we're going to put Bradley Manning in jail for the rest of his life.
My thought on this mail in particular is that I did not see any discussion of things being revealed to EA that shouldn't need to be pulled out of the game, any actual risks. It all seemed to focus on the fact that they didn't get permission, that they consulted with EA without consulting with the DoD first. And we've gotten plenty of emails from people saying, you know, the SEALs consult with gaming companies all the time. So it's not the fact that they shared information, and maybe not even what information they shared. It's that they did it without approval. And so there's still a missing piece for me here about why these guys, who, as our emailer points out, definitely know about keeping your mouth shut, why they did this and got in trouble for this one.
Well, I mean, there's the Washington Post has run a wonderful series of articles explaining how many things are classified that really shouldn't be classified. And so probably about 1 in 10 documents that are classified or actually need to be. But a lot of just routine stuff is as well. So the danger of classified, really, truly, like, will endanger the national security classified information being leaked is very small. But, you know, the Defense Department has procedures. Government bureaucracies hate when their procedures aren't followed. And so, yeah, someone's going to get in trouble. Kind of a shame.
Yeah. All right, well, that's it for this episode of Tech News Today. You can find us on the web. Before we go, though, don't forget to follow Declan McCullagh at CNET. Great stuff that you do over there, Declan. I always enjoy reading your pieces. Anything you want to let folks know about, or just tell them where to find you?
Oh, well, thanks. Declan M is my Twitter ID, and news.com is the best way to get to my stuff and my colleagues' stuff in our little news corner of CNET.
All right, you can find us on the web at twit.tv/TNT. You can email us, tnt@twit.tv, or give us a call and leave us a voicemail. Our phone number is 260-TNT-SHOW. Derek Colanduno joins us tomorrow. We'll see you then.
Mm-hmm.